Seekers, we're not followers, we're seekers. We're actually seeking, and we're each on our own path that only we can know, and we have to be honest about what works for us.
For most Hindus, including me, having a religious wedding ceremony is a must, regardless of how into our faith we are.
So, number one, what is the significance of the fire?
I don't know.
I actually don't know either, yeah. So, they break a coconut. What is the significance of that?
I have no idea. I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know much further than that.
I've come to a wedding food tasting session with Abhi and Rahul. They had their civil marriage in 2019, but had to postpone their Hindu ceremony twice because of coronavirus. They're hoping this will be third time lucky.
I always just wanted, my vision of a wedding was the civil wedding. So you just get, the rings and you just, say vows or whatever, and then you get married, right? But then the Hindu wedding it's like a big part, it's a big thing for Abby, and now it's also become a big thing for me as well. So I think that I'm looking forward to that, the cultural aspect of it.
But what about the actual religious aspect of it? Is it a cultural thing for you, or is it a religious thing, or is it a bit of both?
Religious-wise, I know there's a priest there, so there is obviously some religious ties, but the whole ceremony's in Sanskrit, so that's also something religious. They go through obviously the Sanskrit mantras and stuff like that, but I don't think it'll bring me closer to God necessarily. I think in terms of my relationship with God, I think it stays the same and doesn't really change.
If the ceremony had been done, if it's done in, let's say, Tamil or English, do you think you might feel a bit more connected to it?
No, I think definitely. I think if it was in English or even Tamil, because I'm pretty fluent in Tamil as well, at least I'll be understanding what they're saying. I can understand what they're trying to get across and the meaning behind it. Whereas when they say it in Sanskrit, I have no clue what they're saying, and it's just me listening to these pretty sounding kind of mantras essentially. Yeah,
I think what's better is that you asking these questions is asking myself, why have I not thought about Hinduism as much as I should have? But also, to be honest, what does Hinduism offer that is different to other religions? I don't know. No, yeah. I think, isn't that sad, that we don't know why we have a ceremony that we spend so much money for?
What Rahul said is something I've heard a lot from young Hindus. Many of them don't understand the rituals associated with the faith. And it's questions like that which Sita Suchak from the Hindu Academy often gets.
Once people sort of understand the reasoning behind a certain query they have, it makes them more understanding of Hinduism, and it feels more part of their life. So what we tend to do is we send out a little WhatsApp video clip, which is just 3 minutes long every day, answering a key element of Hindu question which has caused doubt for so many people for so long.
You see, some of the major thinkers in the West, philosophers, have already recognized that monotheism, a supreme personality called God, comes with too many unanswered questions.
We saw the opportunity of, teaching Hinduism in a structured way to young people. We believe in Hinduism that there are a variety of different ways of making spiritual progress, but then we also go a step further. We say that any disciplined human endeavor is also a way of making spiritual progress. Suppose you're doing art, you listen to a piece of music that really touches you. What you're doing, that sort of indescribable feeling, is actually touching base with your true spiritual nature. So you can make spiritual progress through art, music, science, dance, drama, whatever you like. The thing is, as Hindu Academy, we're not here to rubber stamp anybody as being Hindu or not Hindu. We are here to present the spiritual gems which are at the heart of Hinduism.
You're listening to Heart and Soul on the BBC World Service. I'm Nalini Sivadasan, and I'm going on a journey, meeting other young Hindus to find out about their own complex relationship with their faith and trying to work out where my place within Hinduism lies.
We've got pasta, and we've got rice and curry.
I'm in central London, where a group of young volunteers are giving out food to people in need. It's been organised by Hemal Randawala, founder of the charity Go Dharmic. and it engages with Hinduism through seva, the practice of selfless service.
The idea of service and seva and giving back to society is something that resonates with young people here in Britain, and the fact that young Hindus can associate with something that's, at the same time thousands of years old, as well as uniquely relevant to people in their communities right here and now of who we live with.
Are you worried about young people kind of not taking on some of these principles, especially I'm thinking about people that have kind of been born and brought up in the UK, like yourself, like myself?
So I'm not worried at all. I'm very positive. I think that, Hinduism is something that's evolved over thousands of years and continues to evolve. So what will happen is that I believe it will just take more time for young people, young Hindus, to connect with their tradition. But I find that much later on in life, so when people go, above 25, 30, they start to ask questions once they've got their good job and they've chased that economic success. And they start asking the questions which are about the purpose of one's life. And I think Hinduism has those answers. Like if we think about yoga in the West in the last 50 years and the growth of it, and the increase of vegetarianism in the West, is hugely influenced by factors such as ahimsa and non-violence. So I think the values and the traditions and the integration within society and the influence of Hindu ideas is huge and only will continue to grow.
You're listening to the Chaitra Navratri vidcast with Parli Patel.
Welcome, my friends, Badharo.
What would you describe it that your content was giving to Hindus that they weren't getting elsewhere?
It's very different. It's like I do it with culture, where people are kind of connecting with Hinduism and Hindu ideas, but doing it with culture rather than it being just textbook religion.
Parli Patel's a presenter and comedian with a strong following on social media. His Hindu faith and Gujarati culture mean a lot to him and come as a package.
According to how I've been brought up and like what I've been taught, I don't think it's meant to ever be separate. Hinduism doesn't believe that you're meant to like wash out all elements of culture and exist just as a religion. It's quite the opposite, actually. It's meant to become the way you live your life and sit along with your cultural ideas and beliefs and things like that.
You're really proud to be Hindu. And I've had this problem or issue is that even though I've been brought up Hindu, I've sometimes struggled to kind of even put it as one of the markers of my identity.
I suppose I started wearing my Hindu identity more outwardly when I felt that we aren't seen and heard and we're often forgotten. So it became more apparent to me that I should really do this and be seen as a Hindu.
Have you found that there's other Hindus out there who are kind of as visibly kind of out as you? Or is it quite a lonely kind of place to be, especially on social media?
I'll be honest with you, I have moments of frustration because I genuinely feel lonely sometimes where I'm like, gosh, why can't someone else talk about this for a change?
In terms of
all of a sudden, I'm attacked for not being Hindu enough. What's happening is the Hindu identity is becoming more and more politicized. It can leave you feeling paranoid and negative.
I gave them a quiz last week. Yeah, I don't know what you say about your performance.
I think it was okay. I think I did better than Rahul. I knew a bit more things than he did, so I was quite proud of myself. Yeah.
But I'm honest. I don't know anything. I don't know anything about the ceremony. I don't know I'm just gonna be sitting there and just be like, I don't know.
I've brought Abhi and Rahul, the couple who are planning their Hindu wedding ceremony, back to Wimbledon Temple to meet Geetha, who we met earlier. I'm hoping she'll be able to help them make sense of what will be happening. Geetha, you're laughing. Is this sentiment echoed by Rahul? Is that something that you've heard before?
Many times, yes. So the Hindu wedding is just beautiful ceremonies which are steeped in our religion and our traditions and huge symbolism. So the main aspect is on the day you are treated as Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati. So there's very little spoken words. So we don't have vows that we make. The only words actually that are spoken apart from the priest are the father of the brides during the Kanyadanam, which is the period when he ceremoniously gives his hand to you.
We didn't actually. What's the significance of the fire? I think that was first asked, and we actually never actually explained.
Because he's Lord Agni is the Lord of Fire. So he is there for all religious ceremonies. So, the light that we show to God, the arati and things. So the light is supposed to represent the light of God, the light of knowledge.
From what you're saying, it actually sounds like there's loads of beautiful moments in it. Now we can actually both, when we are sitting there on the day, we're like, oh, this is this and this is that. Like, it makes sense now. So it'll be really nice. It has more value to it now. And I wish that going forth, like, more temples and more couples can be involved and kind of find out like why we do this, and maybe it will probably involve them more into the Hindu religion as well, more so than they previously were.
How would you feel if I stopped following Hinduism or I didn't call myself a Hindu? How would you feel about that? Back at home, I'm keen to know what my parents make of me questioning the faith they raised me in.
I mean, it's sad. But I can't persuade, or I can't worry too much. This is partial of the life.
I'll be very disappointed. I'll be very upset. But you're grown up. You decided. But I will be very sad.
If I had children, how maybe would you teach them in a way that's, now you obviously learnt from me and my sister. How would you approach them?
Yeah, I would want the children to be Hindu. I will teach them. And also not like the way I approach you and Priya.
I think sometimes when we were growing up, it's like God is like you should be scared. If you don't do something, then God will punish you. That's kind of that mentality. But it seems like with my nephews and niece, it's like a different way you're teaching them.
Yeah, because I'm just saying God is very kind. God will give you, but only one thing, you have to be nice to other people, then God will help you. I'm not saying God will punish you if you don't do it. That is make them scared. They don't like that religion.
I was surprised to hear that my parents regretted how they taught us Hinduism. I think looking back, it felt that at times we were doing rituals for the sake of it, and a lot of the religion just didn't make sense to me. But now I feel quite proud that my parents realised that their approach perhaps didn't work at times, and they're trying to engage with my niece and nephew in a different, more interactive way, and by doing so, encouraging them to carry on the faith in whatever way they want to. I've always thought that maybe I'm not Hindu enough, as I've had doubts about the faith. However, Indian politician Shashi Tharoor's book, Why I Am a Hindu, made me see my faith in another way. I still had some questions though. I grew up actually eating beef, and it was actually one of the prompts for me to start asking questions about my faith because, my parents encouraged me to eat beef, but then kind of externally, I was kind of being told that I shouldn't eat it. Was I a bad Hindu for eating it?
No, absolutely not. That's the important thing to understand, is Hinduism has absolutely no compulsory dogmas. What the extraordinary thing about Hinduism is that it is such a diverse faith that the believer, the reader, the seeker can choose what he wishes to believe in from the multiplicity of the text materials and ideas available to him.
I feel like I've been having a Hindu identity crisis. But from what you say, do you think Hinduism, or what we know to be Hinduism, is having an identity crisis?
I think when you look at it, it's India and Indian politics that has projected this identity crisis. Everything is fair, up for debate, for discussion. And that's what I think has been completely reduced to this intolerant nonsense by a bunch of semi-lettered bigots who call themselves the Hindutva movement. As a Hindu movement. It is not Hinduism as philosophy, as religion, or as doctrine. It is Hinduism as badge of identity that these political Hindus are emphasizing. It is reducing Hinduism to the identity politics of the British football hooligan, saying that, if you don't support my team, I'll bash you on the head. That sort of attitude to Hinduism has nothing to do with the philosophy and the values of the faith as I've learned it and grown up with it.
What advice do you have for me and other people like me who perhaps might be struggling with their kind of Hindu identity?
I would say that you really need to come to terms with what it is you're uncomfortable with and realize that that's fine. That if you don't want to take the drastic step of rejecting the religion into which you were born, then understand it better.
It's been reassuring to learn that I'm not the only person who has a complicated relationship with Hinduism. Younger Hindus are now questioning the practices and rituals which our parents often followed without much thought. To me, these traditions have sometimes made the faith seem rigid and inflexible. But that's the opposite of Hinduism. And what I've discovered is that Hinduism has always been evolving and changing. You don't have to go to the temple to be a Hindu. You can still eat beef, and it's okay that I can be reluctant to embrace my Hinduness. Hinduism has pluralism at its core. There's no one way of practicing it. Questioning and challenging the faith isn't a bad thing either. In fact, it is often encouraged. And it has made me realise I do have a place in Hinduism, whichever path I choose to get to it. Heart and Soul was presented by me, Nalini Sivadathan, and produced by Akhtar Ahmed.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's Harriet Gilbert to tell you about the next World Book Club.
It hasn't rained for 2 years in the small Australian farming community of Kiwara. Did the strain of the drought drive Luke Hadley to kill his wife and son before taking his own life? Or is there much more to this apparent murder-suicide?
World Book Club with The Dry by Jane Harper from the 3rd of July. And in an hour, The Evidence with Claudia Hammond.
And with your questions about the impact of COVID-19 on our bodies, I'll be asking what we do know today about this virus and how much we still need to learn. My panel includes scientists at the forefront of the endeavour to crack COVID.
Stay with us. The newsroom is next on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
At 10 hours GMT. First, the news.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. Classified British government documents have been found at a bus stop in southern England and handed to the BBC. One paper, marked Secret, UK Eyes Only, outlines proposals for a British military presence in Afghanistan following the withdrawal of NATO troops. Another considers the likely Russian reaction to the passage of a British Navy ship off Crimea last week. A British government minister, Brandon Lewis, said an investigation had been launched.
I think it is a serious breach, and the Ministry of Defence, I've spoken to the Defence Secretary, are taking forward an internal investigation into how this happened. To an extent, processes were followed, that it was reported by the individual as soon as they were aware that they had left those documents, and obviously somebody handed it into the BBC. But there will be a full investigation by the Ministry of Defence into how this happened. And again, we've got to ensure that when things like this happen, whether it's human error or otherwise, that it can't happen again.
French voters are electing regional administrations, with the far right desperate to gain their first foothold before next year's presidential poll. Marine Le Pen's national rally did not perform as strongly as predicted in last week's first round, and President Emmanuel Macron's party is heading for another poor performance. From Paris, here's Lucy Williamson.
There are several results to watch out for today. Whether the far-right National Rally will manage to beat the alliance against it to take its first region in Provence. Whether France's traditional parties will emerge stronger from this election, and which of the candidates from the centre-right Republicans will come out of this ballot in pole position for the presidential race next year. President Macron's own party has struggled to make an impression. So far, the map of this election looks very much like the France of 5 years ago, before President Macron came to power.
More than 100 fighters are reported to have been killed in northern Yemen in fierce clashes between government forces and Houthi rebels. The fighting took place over the past 3 days as pro-government forces battled to retain control of the city of Marib. Here's Alan Johnston.
Pro-government sources say their side lost nearly 30 men, but they said their defences had held, partly thanks to help from their Saudi allies who launched airstrikes on rebel positions. The government says more than 80 rebels were killed. The Houthis themselves have made no comment. They've been trying to capture the oil-rich Marib region for months. It's home to hundreds of thousands of people who've been displaced by fighting elsewhere in Yemen, and aid workers fear the battle could cause a humanitarian disaster.
The Taliban are reported to have made more gains in Afghanistan. The militants say they've taken the districts of Syedabad and Chak in Wardak province. Syedabad straddles a main road linking the capital to Kandahar in the south. World News from the BBC. Iran's parliamentary speaker says international inspectors won't be given video footage from inside some of the country's nuclear sites. Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf said the film would stay in Iranian hands. Earlier this year, Iran downgraded its cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, but it agreed to store video footage that the inspectors might be able to see at a later date. That temporary monitoring deal expired last week. The IAEA has been pressing to extend it. Analysts say the absence of such a deal could complicate efforts to revive the 2015 nuclear accord. The mayor of the Miami County, where an apartment block collapsed on Thursday, says 5 people are now known to have died. Daniela Levine-Carver said rescuers had found a body in the rubble, as well as other human remains. More than 150 people are still unaccounted for. The mayor told reporters that DNA testing would be needed.
The process of identifying these victims is very difficult. We're going to be relying on DNA testing, and that is why we've already been gathering DNA samples from the family members. So they have all participated and provided DNA to assist us in the identification.
Malaysia is extending a national coronavirus lockdown that was due to have ended on Monday. Malaysians are currently banned from travelling more than 10 kilometres from home, schools are closed, and only businesses deemed essential are allowed to operate. The Prime Minister, Muhyiddin Yassin, said restrictions would only be eased when the number of new infections fell below 4,000 a day. A prominent Saudi author and activist has been released after 3 years in jail. Nasima Aseda had campaigned for the rights of women and the Shia minority. Following her arrest and trial behind closed doors, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Charlotte Gallagher. Classified documents are normally hidden in safes or locked in cabinets. You don't expect them to be strewn across a street, but that's what happened to British government papers that were found by a member of the public and handed to the BBC. I'm joined now by our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. So, Paul, how were these documents found and what do they reveal?
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. They were found, as you say, behind a bus stop, lying in a soggy pile in the rain early on Tuesday morning by a member of the public. He looked at them, recognised that they might be sensitive, took them home, dried them out, and eventually contacted the BBC. And believes that in doing so, he was doing a responsible thing. Others, of course, will take a different view of that, but that was what he felt was a decent thing to do. They cover a range of issues, from not particularly sensitive stuff to do with fairly routine defence business, but then there's discussions of updates on British arms trade, which is always commercially extremely sensitive. One document about a recent UK-US defence dialogue, but crucially, a whole set of documents to do with this passage of HMS Defender. This is a Type 45 destroyer, a British destroyer that sailed very close to the Crimean coast last Wednesday. It was a very high-profile operation. It drew quite a hostile Russian response, and the papers show that this mission was the subject of enormous debate, with discussion about what route should be taken, and if this route is taken, what will be the likely Russian response. So, something that's over, but clearly a very classified discussion. The final document, which I think is perhaps the most sensitive, and it is marked secret UK eyes only, is to do with Britain's military presence in Afghanistan after the end of the NATO operation that's currently winding down. And that obviously is looking to the future. It's a very, very sensitive issue to do with what kind of military footprint we might have on the ground after basically everyone has left. And that's clearly not something that should have ever really left the office, frankly.
It's obviously really embarrassing. How damaging is it?
I think, having spoken quite a bit to the Ministry of Defence over the past couple of days, there's oodles of the former, embarrassing, perhaps less of the latter. Clearly, had these documents fallen into the wrong hands, whoever hands those might be, on Tuesday, 24 hours before HMS Defender carried out that operation, that could have been extremely damaging. And ditto with the papers about Afghanistan. Anything that relates to national security, particularly when it has operational details, that is just not the stuff you want to have out there. And so, the potential for damage was very considerable. I think the potential for an individual's career and damage to that career is also quite considerable. But I don't think it goes any further than that.
And have we had any reaction from the British government?
Yes, so the Ministry of Defence confirmed that the loss of these papers was reported by an individual at the time, and that an investigation has been launched involving Ministry of Defence police, and they said it would be inappropriate to comment further.
Thanks, Paul. That was our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. Next, more than 150 people are still missing after an apartment block collapsed near Miami. 5 people are known to have died in the disaster in Surfside, but it's feared that number will rise significantly. Our correspondent James Reynolds reports.
The remains of the Champlain Towers South are incredibly difficult to get into. Fires from deep within the wreckage are beating back rescue teams. They're having to go bit by bit, wherever they can get past the smoke. But officials insist that the search for survivors is not yet over.
We are continuing our search and rescue because our first responders believe there's still a possibility. There are crevices, so there's air. They're able to, pick through. But right now, obviously, we're trying to stabilize the situation because of the fire and the smoke.
For family members, it is an agonizing time. On the fence of a nearby tennis court, they've put up photos of the relatives who were asleep in the tower when it collapsed.
They're still looking for my mom and my grandmother. As a family member who saw the footage and the days that have passed by, we know there's no hope of them being alive. We're just hoping they maybe find some kind of remains or something.
Families want to know how a 40-year-old building could simply come down within seconds. An inspection carried out in 2018 found evidence of major structural damage to a concrete slab below the swimming pool and also abundant cracking of columns and beams in the building's garage. But repairs were not immediately carried out. The authorities have promised a full investigation.
Eliana Salzhauer is an elected commissioner for Surfside. She says search and rescue teams are struggling to work their way through the rubble.
There's fires that have been starting, and from what I'm told, it's from the fuel that was in the basement for the backup generator. And so the fires are starting under the rubble, and when they pour the water, they can't get to the fire because it's, a maze. So they're not able to easily put out the fires, and there's a lot of them. So they start, and then they have to get to each one. It's not very straightforward because it's such a big pile of rubble, and the fire is somewhere underneath there. It's grim. There are some people that are hoping. They're still hoping because we've seen in other countries, under the rubble, out of the rubble, weeks later, someone gets pulled out alive. So people are hoping that maybe we'll get that kind of a miracle. But we haven't even gotten bodies. We've only had 5 bodies, and we have 157 people that are unaccounted for, that are probably in that building. And only 5 whole bodies have been removed, which means that we're looking at 152 body parts. So for me, I understand the need to be hopeful, and I try to be hopeful, but also, I'm being realistic. It's going to take a miracle to find people alive, and I would just hope that we could find the bodies so that the families can have that closure.
Eliana Salzhauer, and of course we'll keep you up to date on that story on BBC World Service. Analysts are warning against reading too much into the results of the French regional elections, but nevertheless, there's a struggle going on for the political soul of the country. En Marche, the party of President Emmanuel Macron, is expected to be punished again in this second round. The polls are also being seen as a chance for potential candidates to shine before next year's presidential elections. The right-wing National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen hopes to win its first ever region in Provence, but faces a strong challenge from the centre-right, as our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield explains.
The big takeaway, as they say, from round one was the very high abstention rate in the election. Only 1 in 3 of the voters turned out, which raises all sorts of questions about French democracy, of course. But the interesting thing was that it affected all the parties, including the hard-right National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen. Her core voters, the youngsters, the white working class who normally turn out for her, didn't last Sunday. And the key question this second round is whether she can re-galvanise them, get them to turn out, and if she can, then all is not lost for her, because she did very disappointingly badly in round one. The key question, all eyes will be on this region of Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur in the south, where her candidate, Thierry Mariani, is in a strong position. He could take it, and if he does take it, then it'll be a first for the hard right and a big boost for them ahead of the presidential elections. For the rest, the Macron party, this is their candidate in the Ile-de-France region, no hopers. They're not going to win anything. In fact, in many regions, their candidate hasn't even qualified because they did so badly in round one. So the attention this Sunday is most likely going to be on the centre-right, the mainstream right, the old Gaullists, the party of Sarkozy and Chirac, the Republican Party as they call themselves now. If they can build on their successful showing in round one, if they can hold on to the regions they already have with a bigger score, that'll be a big boost for them ahead of the presidentials next year, because it'll show, or they'll be able to say, that they, and not the hard right, not the National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen, they are the true alternative to Emmanuel Macron. And who is the person who is going to be chosen to lead them into those presidential elections? Well, probably it'll be one of the characters who've come to the fore in these regional elections, like Valérie Pécresse in the Ile-de-France region here, like Xavier Bertrand in the north, like Laurent Wauquiez in the Lyon region. These are the names to remember.
That was Hugh Schofield, and you're listening to the BBC World Service. John has the headlines.
The BBC has seen classified documents from the British Defence Ministry discussing Russia and Afghanistan that were found at a bus stop by a member of the public. The people of France are voting in a second round of regional elections, which are being watched closely for who's likely to perform well in next year's presidential race. And fierce fighting between Houthi rebels and Yemeni government forces is reported to have killed more than 100 people.
Thanks, John. Yes, there's been a significant upsurge in clashes in recent days. For more, I'm joined by our Middle East regional editor, Alan Johnston. And Alan, what more do we know about this latest fighting?
Well, this is a battle going on in a pretty remote part of Yemen. There's no independent reporting on the ground. What we're hearing comes from the government side, and the government holds the Marib region. These sources are saying that there have been 3 days of intense fighting, that the Houthis launched attacks on 3 fronts, from the north, the west, and the south, that there were intense exchanges of artillery fire, and that Saudi warplanes, which back the government side, struck repeatedly at rebel positions. According to the government sources, the rebels didn't manage to breach Marib's defences. The government side said it lost nearly 30 fighters over these 3 days, and that the rebels lost more than 80. The rebels themselves haven't commented. But as you say, this was clearly another major flare-up in the long-running effort of the Houthi movement to try to capture the Marib region.
And why are the rebels putting so much effort into capturing this particular place?
In the context of Yemen's civil war, Marib really matters. It has huge strategic significance. For a start, it's an oil-rich area. It would be a big economic prize for the rebels in what is a very poor country. And Marib has real political significance as well. Marib is the last major stronghold of the government in the north of the country. If the government was driven out of this region, its position would be significantly weakened, and the rebels would go to any future peace talks in a stronger position. They would be the faction that held the whole of the north of the country. So as I say, Marib really matters.
And what impact is this having on civilians? Because, I mean, you see photos of what's going on there and hear the stories of people. They're obviously the real victims.
Well, for a long time, Marib was lucky. It was rather left out of Yemen's civil war as a comparatively peaceful corner of the country for years. It did quite well economically. It even began to flourish to an extent. It attracted hundreds of thousands of civilians who were displaced, forced out of their homes in other parts of Yemen, and they came, as it were, to take shelter in the Marib region. It absorbed perhaps as many as a million of these people. Many of them live in camps around the town, and aid workers have warned again and again that if the battle sweeps through the city and surrounding areas, there could be a humanitarian disaster.
Alan, thank you. That was Alan Johnston. Australia has a reputation of a country filled with dangerous animals that can kill you, including the man-eating sharks that surround the island. For decades, about 50 shark nets along the eastern coast have protected swimmers and surfers from the predators. But they've also caught and killed many other animals, such as whales, dolphins and turtles. Now, there are growing calls for the nets to be removed. Our correspondent Phil Mercer is in Sydney and sent this report.
Shark sighting, a rather large shark. We do advise that nobody enter the water.
Lifeguards in Australia act quickly when they spot a dark, menacing shape or a fin in the water. Along parts of the New South Wales coast, shark nets are installed in the warmer months, but many marine experts say it's outdated technology. Beachgoers have mixed opinions.
We've got to try to protect our kids, so that's what it's all about to me.
The sea creatures and the wildlife getting stuck out there. You take a risk if you swim in the ocean, and that's where sharks belong.
The nets can be a graveyard for wildlife, according to Sian Liddy, a marine biologist.
They've been shown to cause entanglements of a lot of different species. Approximately 90% of the animals caught were actually non-target species, such as turtles, such as dolphins. It's adversely affecting threatened and protected species here in New South Wales.
Several coastal councils want to get rid of the shark nets. David Walton, a councillor in Sydney's Northern Beaches region, favours baited hooks and aerial surveillance.
We're picking up a strong sentiment
from the community to remove the shark nets and replace them with other more modern risk mitigation strategies.
Callum Brown from Sydney's Macquarie University believes there are better alternatives.
Probably the best solution would be to use drone technology, and you can have artificial intelligence going through that video footage, recognising not just the shark, but what species of the shark and how big the shark is. And you can automatically warn bathers in real time.
Fatal shark attacks in Australia are rare. Experts say that more people are killed each year by bee stings or accidents with horses. Despite the concerns of conservationists, New South Wales has no plans to remove the shark nets. The state government says beaches are safer when there's a combination of technologies and deterrence.
Phil Mercer. Now, John has some other stories from our news desk.
There have been 2 explosions at the high-security Indian Air Force base at Jammu Airport in Indian-administered Kashmir. The first tore a hole in the roof of a building where military hardware is kept. The other exploded on the ground shortly afterwards. The Defence Ministry said there was no other damage and no injuries. The base is the main support for the Indian Army in the region. Moscow has recorded 144 COVID-19 deaths in the latest 24-hour period, the worst toll in a Russian city since the start of the pandemic. Moscow's record comes a day after the one set by St. Petersburg, where a Euro 2020 football quarter-final game is to be held on Friday in front of thousands of fans. And a memorial service is taking place today in the German city of Würzburg, 2 days after a Somali man murdered 3 women and injured several others, 5 of them critically. The attacker, who had stored IS material in his home and had spoken of carrying out a jihad, had specifically targeted women. His asylum application had been rejected, but he was allowed to stay in Germany. He was known to the police as a violent criminal.
Thanks, John. The knockout stage at Euro 2020 is in full swing. And on Saturday, it was a bit of a struggle for Italy, who've emerged as one of the favourites for the tournament. Our reporter Maz Faruqi joins us now. So a close run thing for Italy.
Hello, Charlotte. Yeah, our first extra time of this men's European Championship at Wembley Stadium. Italy kept frustrated for long periods of time by Austria. In fact, they thought they'd gone behind towards the end of the second half, but video technology ruled Marko Arnautovic was offside when he put the ball into the back of the Italian net. Italy then going on to win 2-1 in extra time, but I think a lot of us, including myself, thought because they are big contenders that they would play a lot better than they did. They do reach a new milestone, though, and that win means it's now 31 unbeaten games in a row for the Azzurri, which breaks the unbeaten run set by the great Italian team of the 1930s, that side which won 2 World Cups. Earlier on Saturday, Denmark were brilliant in Amsterdam as they beat Wales 4-1, and they will play the winner of the match we have here in Budapest later next in the quarterfinals. It's either the Netherlands or the Czech Republic.
So what are your predictions with what's happening today?
Well, let's start with this game here at Budapest's Puskás Arena in the Netherlands, as Italy were last night. Heavy favourites to beat the Czech Republic. They're the tournament's top scorers in the group stage, 3 wins from 3, and they seem to be getting better game by game. A lot of headlines around the game here, though, that Gini Wijnaldum, the Dutch captain, has said he will wear a rainbow armband in support of LGBTQ plus rights. Obviously, this is after the incidences here that we've had at this Puskás Arena of homophobic abuse. So that's something that we're going to be keeping an eye on today. The other game later in Seville is a very tough one to call. The holders Portugal against the number 1 ranked side in the world, Belgium. Some absolutely massive names in the game on show in that game lining up against one another. Cristiano Ronaldo is now 1 goal away from being men's international football's all-time leading goal scorer. He's on 109 at the moment, and he looks in great form to try and make it 110. We've got Bruno Fernandes, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku, all over the field, world-class players. That is a really difficult matchup to predict, but I think the Netherlands will have just too much for the Czech Republic here in Budapest later.
Thanks, Maz. That was Maz Faruqi, who's in Budapest for us. It was only a trial, but an important one. The famous nightlife on the Spanish island of Ibiza could roar back into life again if a pilot project this weekend proves a success. Fat Phil Cooper is a DJ and says Ibiza needs clubbing.
There is something magical about the island. Ibiza is about the clubbing, and it would be foolish You can't stop clubbing, simple as, there needs to be a place for it somewhere, and if it's not here, it's going to be somewhere else.
The nightclubs on the island were closed by the government because of the coronavirus, but could open again next month. Our correspondent Anna Holligan has gone to see for herself, and she told me about this pilot project.
The event was reserved for key workers, so people who'd been looking after this island during the crisis, and there were 1,500 tickets available. To get inside, along with their ticket, they needed a negative PCR test or to be double vaccinated. Then inside, people were allowed to dance, but only on the dance floor. And even then, they had to keep their masks on. And then around the tables on the outside, they could drink, take their masks off. There was hugging, kissing, all that kind of usual stuff that you'd expect in a club. But the thing that makes this so special is that right across the rest of the island, and you might be able to hear the waves now, I'm sitting on the edge of San Antonio Bay, right across the rest of Ibiza, the clubs are still closed. So this is really critical because they need to find a way, the industry needs to find a way to convince the people that there is a safe way to hold these types of events without jeopardizing public health.
Because I know that one of the DJs you spoke to said Ibiza is clubbing, and if we don't have clubbing in Ibiza, people will just go elsewhere.
Well, that's exactly the point. And there is a real fear that could happen if this industry doesn't reopen fast enough, because of course the beaches, the water, it's all spectacular. But what draws people in, initially especially, so many teenagers come here as soon as they can travel alone. They come for the clubs, Pasha, Manumission, they're all kind of legendary names and so familiar to so many people.
And obviously so many people on the island will work in tourism and the island needs tourism. But are there fears from some people about opening up and getting all these tourists back to the island?
It's interesting because I've spoken to a lot of people who say, well, it's been okay through the pandemic. We've managed and we've had a chance to enjoy our island without the tourism, but it's time now. It's enough. We need the tourists to come back. Last night alone, there were 170 people employed for that one event. So the bar staff, the security, the dancers. And it really feeds the island. So many people depend on this clubbing reputation. It's the party capital of the world. And that's what people come back for.
That was Anna Holligan. And as you could probably tell with those waves lapping behind her, she was broadcasting live from a beach. And if you want to be even more jealous of Anna Holligan, go on her Twitter and you can see loads more photos and videos of Ibiza and what's been happening on the island. As they get back to normal, lots of places like Ibiza, they need tourists. You've been listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Charlotte Campbell.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, where Ishleen Kaur continues her investigation into one of the world's biggest yoga schools.
In 2019, Julie Salter accused the late founder of Shivananda Yoga of multiple counts of abuse. During the 15 months of my investigation, more stories from within the organisation came to light.
There was an incident. There were a few warnings and a few things happened that I didn't like.
He used to tell me I was looking like a beautiful young Indian lady. He was like praising me, so I was of course feeling good.
Join me as I discover a dark legacy surrounding Shivananda Yoga.
I was so scared that he would shout at me and be angry.
That changed my whole perspective of what was actually going on behind the scenes, across the globe, really.
Guru, a dark legacy at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
Next on the BBC World Service. I'm Rajvi Vora, a jewelry designer on a mission to learn more about gold. I'll be exploring gold's past, present, and future. And in this first episode of the Golden Age of Gold, we begin our journey in the ancient world. We'll hear how it spurred on dramatic changes to populations. And I'll be making sense of what it means to me, my family, and my culture on the BBC World Service.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. Classified documents from the British Ministry of Defence have been found on a street in southern England and handed to the BBC. One paper marked Secret, UK Eyes Only, outlines proposals for a British military presence in Afghanistan after NATO troops have left. A cabinet minister has described the discovery as a serious breach of security and promised a full investigation. Voters in France are electing regional administrations, seen as an indicator of who's likely to do well in next year's presidential race. Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally wants to win control of its first region, but it did not perform as strongly as expected in the first round. More than 100 fighters are reported to have been killed in 3 days of clashes between Yemeni government forces and Houthi rebels in the north of the country. The rebels have been trying to capture the oil-rich Marib region for several months. In Afghanistan, the Taliban are reported to have taken more districts which straddle a key highway linking the capital Kabul to Kandahar in the south and western areas. On Saturday, the group claimed to have captured a government base along the highway. There have been 2 explosions at the high-security Indian Air Force base at Jammu Airport in Indian-administered Kashmir. The Air Force is investigating the possibility that it was attacked by a drone. A prominent Saudi author and activist has been released after 3 years in jail. Nassima al-Sadeh, who is from the restive Shia region of Al-Qatif, had organised campaigns for women's and Shia minority rights. And the British government says it will conduct an internal investigation into the covert filming that led to the resignation of the Health Secretary Matt Hancock. A minister said the Health Department would examine how a camera came to be hidden in the office and how the footage of Mr. Hancock kissing an aide was leaked. BBC News.
I remember my wedding so vividly. The guests were a rush of colours, the women in jewel-bright saris and the men in ornate sherwanis. Over the course of the 8-day celebration, everything was perfect and plentiful. And everywhere I looked, I saw gold. My name is Rajvi Vora, and for me, gold has always been an important part of life. My family are Indian Kenyans, and so growing up, it was something that was always treated with great respect and hugely valued.
Compared to any other asset, I think gold is the asset.
But it wasn't just my father who cared about gold. From a young age, I was aware that my mother was saving, so that one day, when I got married, I'd receive some gold of my own.
In my wedding, my mom had to give me her gold because at that time they couldn't afford it.
We'll hear more from my mom later, but first, let's step inside the place where I work. It's here, in a small shop on a quiet back street in Marylebone, London, that I design and then sell jewellery. Gold jewellery. So now, you may understand what a huge part gold plays in my life. Which is why I, across 3 episodes of The Compass, will be learning more about the role that gold plays in our past, our present, and our future, and asking why humans are so fascinated by gold. You're listening to episode 1 of The Golden Age of Gold on the BBC World Service. Whenever I speak to my family about gold, they always mention how it's been passed down through the ages, from generation to generation. But just how far back does it go? In discovering the history of gold, we must go back to 2600 BC.
Gold was first found at surface level in riverbanks of the Pactolus in Lydia in western Turkey, and it made these people for a time one of the richest countries in the world.
That's Salima Ikram, an Egyptologist and archaeologist living in Cairo.
But almost as early as gold was washing up on our riverbanks, humans were questing down into the earth. We think that the Egyptians were the first to mine gold, and they were followed by the Nubians and much later by the Romans in Africa, Portugal and Spain.
Ancient gold is synonymous with Egypt, from the death mask of Tutankhamun to Cleopatra. It's something that Salima is fascinated by.
For the ancient Egyptians, gold had an extraordinary value because for them it was what the flesh of the gods was made out of. So according to the Egyptians, the gods' bones were made of silver, their flesh was of gold, and their hair was of lapis lazuli. And when they buried people, the coffins, in fact, reflect this often because you have the blue paint or blue inlay for the hair, and the faces are gold or gilded. And in some cases, if you were poor, you would just paint them yellow, pretend it was gold. The ancient Egyptians valued gold a great deal, and in fact they mined it, they collected it, they traded it, and it was something that they traded throughout the ancient world. In fact, a lot of the gold that you have even today, especially in Egypt, probably has a small percentage of ancient Egyptian gold in it.
As a jeweler, I love getting inspiration for new creations from the jewelry of the past. I asked Salima what those pieces would have looked like.
Some of the nicest ones are actually from the Middle Kingdom, about 1800 BC, and there were a huge bunch of jewellery found from various princesses' burials, and some of it is extraordinarily delicate from Princess Khnumet, where she has this wonderful wreath that goes around her head, and there's this fabulous collar of Queen Ahotep, which is made up of different strands of amulet, where you've got cats and you've got lions and panthers chasing antelope, and you've got sun discs and spirals. And at the bottom there are a huge number of little bells, so when she walked, she would have tinkled and you would have heard the Queen coming. Some of the jewellery had ritual purpose. It wasn't just for adornment. It was for protection, but also you would wear certain things if you were going to carry out a specific ceremony. So there are these things that we have again from the Middle Kingdom burials of these royal women, which are made up of heads of panthers or leopards, as well as armlets and wristlets where you have little claws attached to them. So it was as if the woman was being transformed into a cat, evoking one of the great goddesses.
The idea that gold and jewelry has transformative powers struck a chord with me. I talked to my mum about the part gold plays in our spirituality.
Any church or any mosque or the domes of any religious monument, it's all inlaid with gold. It has the highest sensitivity and receptivity of the energy from the sun. And the sun is worshipped as a god, so from sun god. And also it's an inspiration for artists. Rajvi, if you remember Tanjore paintings in India, they are specifically done in gold and only deities.
I'm always in awe of the gold I see in temples. I asked Salima when it first got tied into human worship.
The Egyptians believed that it was the flesh of the gods, while in Peru, the Incas believed gold was the sweat of the sun god, Inti. Inti was represented as a gold disc with human features and flames and rays extending from his face. In their law, Inti ordered his children to build the Inca capital wherever a divine golden wedge they carried would penetrate into the earth. They write that this happened in the city of Cusco. So it is in Cusco that we find the remains of the Corincancha, or Temple of the Sun. This was once the most sacred shrine of the Inca temple. 16th century Spanish inventories describe walls plated with 700 half-meter square sheets of pure gold, each weighing 2 kilograms, and a golden garden with life-size solid gold animals. It is from this list that we know that the Spanish conquistadors stole an enormous gold disc representing Inti, which is now lost forever because they probably melted it down. Ancient Colombian gold was also plundered by the Spanish. The Colombians revered gold for its luster and association with the sun, and in powdered form was used to cover the body of the future king in a lavish coronation ceremony. This gave rise to the legend of El Dorado.
The legend of El Dorado is a powerful one. It tells of a South American city full of gold. So did it exist? And if so, how did it elude the many who searched for it? Perhaps Edgar Allan Poe phrased it best in his poem El Dorado, which tells of an old knight in search of the golden city. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. "Shadow," said he, "where can it be? This land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow, Ride, boldly ride, the shade replied, if you seek for El Dorado. This idea of hidden gold and untold riches laced with powerful magic is a recurring theme in mythology and storytelling. In fact, if we delve back through the stories of the past, it certainly doesn't take us long to stumble upon treasure.
Where there is a treasure hoard, sooner or later there will be a dragon.
Carolyn Larrington is a professor of medieval literature at the University of Oxford and a folklore expert. In the gardens of King's College, she told me about the tales from the Middle Ages with gold at their heart.
In the most famous of Old English poems, the poem Beowulf, there is a hoard that's placed in the earth by a man whose entire tribe has been killed in battle, and very soon a dragon sniffs it out and comes and sits on it. And for 300 years that's absolutely fine. The dragon sits on the hoard and nobody disturbs it. But in the reign of Beowulf, who by now is quite an aged king, a slave breaks into the barrow where the dragon lives and steals a single goblet. But of course, when the dragon wakes up, it has a kind of accountant's eye for how much treasure it should have. And it knows that something is missing and it sniffs around the treasure. It finds the tracks of the thief and then it waits till nightfall. And then this particular dragon is a fiery dragon and a flying dragon. So it bursts out of its barrow, it flies across the kingdom, it burns down Beowulf's mead hall. The dragon can't be appeased, and so Beowulf has to go and fight it. But he is perhaps just a little too old to be fighting dragons. And he's on the verge of dying when one of his young companions comes to help him. And together they kill the dragon, but Beowulf is done for. Beowulf's body is brought down from the barrow with all the treasure that he's won. But Beowulf's people, the Yats of what's now southern Sweden, are so distraught at the loss of their king that they put all of the treasure on his funeral pyre and then in the barrow that they build around his ashes. And as the poet says, we end up with the gold back in the dust, as useless to men now as it was before when the dragon was sitting on it.
I could spend all day talking about gold as a beautiful, spiritual, magical substance, but of course, it has a whole other identity, its place in economics. Professor Charles Larkin is an economist and monetary thought expert.
In some ways, gold is the perfect money. It's hard to get, lovely to look at, can be cut and shaped without losing its value, and it's incredibly hardy. For something to function as money, it has to be a store of value, medium of exchange, fungible, durable, portable, and trusted. But there's a reason we don't have purses full of gold coins. It relies on the amount of the stuff you can get out of the ground. Strapping your economy to something countries have very little control over. Gold coins started popping up around 2,500 years ago. Egypt, which is often associated with the ideas of early gold, actually adopted money very late. For the ancient Egyptians, gold was a fixation rather than a currency, with their economic system based upon a sophisticated accounting method using measures of grain.
So only a few hundred years ago, the change in your pocket would have been literally worth its weight in gold. But Charles told me it was a system not without its flaws.
Pure gold coinage is not entirely practical. It's simply worth too much. For some, this was an invitation to remove some of the coin by clipping the edges off. The bits of metal would then be melted down, resulting in coins in regular circulation sometimes being up to 50% less in size and weight than when they left the mint. At first, the response was to develop new technologies to quote-unquote mill the coins, which meant to put edges on them so that people could easily identify the clipping. In England, this lives on in the grooves and mottos on the edges of our current coins, and by severe punishments meted out by the Master of the Mint, which at that time was none other than Sir Isaac Newton, who sent many clippers to the gallows.
I had no idea that we can thank the rough edges and odd shapes of our coins to Isaac Newton. But as a jeweler, I did know that gold is surprisingly soft, so it makes sense that harvesting little bits of a coin would be a very simple way to inflate your earnings in the 1600s. Another useful property of gold is that you can combine it with other metals. For example, rose gold is a combination of gold, silver, and copper. So gold's willingness to play with other metals is a good thing. It can make it stronger, cheaper, and change its color, but of course, it also devalues it. I have to take all my jewelry above a certain weight to the assay office, quite an intimidating building, where the goldsmith company will certify its purity. It's something that is crucial for my work, but also quite a mysterious process. I sat down with Goldsmith Company librarian Eleni Bide to find out more. So tell me about the first quality checks on gold.
I suppose this relates to hallmarking, which is still a really important thing that the Goldsmiths Company Assay Office does today. Hallmarking is the UK's oldest continuous form of consumer protection, and the first Hallmarking Act was established in 1300. The King says everything that's made and put to sale that's sold to consumers that's described as gold has to be the touch of Paris, and that's just over 19 carats in today's kind of understanding. And to show that it's up to this standard, you have to put a special mark on it, and this is known as the King's Mark, and it's applied by the guardians of the craft, and this is members of the Goldsmiths Company, even before the Goldsmiths Company got its first royal charter.
So amazing, so fascinating.
The first assay office was set up in 1478. Previous to that, what they would have done is gone round shop to different workshops to test the things that were being made and put for sale. Now, this has got two problems. Firstly, sometimes the jewellers and the silversmiths who perhaps weren't as honest as they could be could see the wardens of the Goldsmiths Company coming and would lock the doors and send the apprentices out of the back with all the dodgy stuff. And so it could be quite difficult to try and maintain good regulations under those kind of conditions. And also, of course, there's no central place to do the testing, and there are two main ways that you might do the testing in these early times. The first, you use a touchstone and a set of touch needles. A touchstone is a very flat piece of black rock, maybe a basalt, and what you do is you take your gold item, scrape it along the surface, and that scraping would leave a little mark of gold. And then you would take touch needles, so that's a little needle of gold of known fineness, so you know it's 22 carat because you've made it yourself. You scrape it along the other side, you might put a little bit of acid on the top just to bring the colours up more, and then you compare the colours and then see whether the colours are the same and whether something's up to the right standard. So it's a quick way of doing it, but is not as accurate as the other method, and this is known as cupellation or fire assay, and the term fire assay gives you a good idea of what's involved here. And this is, you take a little sample of the gold itself, so maybe you have to scrape a little bit off, and you wrap it up in some lead, you melt it, which then just brings out the pure gold.
Talking to Eleni about medieval goldsmiths made me want to find out more about this ancient craft. So I went to Hatton Garden, London's famous jewellery quarter, to visit Smith & Harris, one of the UK's oldest precious metal workshops.
Hi.
Hi, guys. This is amazing. Wow. Truly incredible. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. Obviously has a lot of history.
It does. 2019 was the 200th anniversary of this being a silversmithing workshop. So yes, there have been people constantly working gold and silver here. We've got 17 different workshops in this building, all jewellers and people to do with the gold trade. You get regular bangs and noises and water running and all sorts of things. So yes, much has changed in this workshop. We now work with computers and lasers, but a lot of what you can see here, some of this is 400 years, let alone 300 years old. The basic melting of gold and working in gold, we often jokingly say that, the people who made Tutankhamun's mask could come down here and, after a bit of a surprise with the electric lights and one thing and another, could probably find their way around a lot of our hammers and other tools.
This is amazing because I've not seen anything like this in London, and it reminds me a lot of some of these really old workshops in India. There's this one place in Mumbai that it's part of the Diamond District, and it's like literally you just keep on climbing stairs, and every single stair there's like 15 workshops. Would you be able to give us a little tour?
Of course. So, we're standing in the centre of the workshop now. We've got a large rack of steel tools. Now, we call these stakes, We've got raising stakes here. We generally explain that most of these shapes are the insides of objects. So if you imagine we are shaping metal over these, if you take something like the contour of this, which is really just a simple arc, we can hammer something like a beaker over that. One of these, which I'm searching for at the moment, is could be Elizabethan. Some of these are really very, very old.
You're listening to episode 1 of the Golden Age of Gold on the BBC World Service. In this whistle-stop tour of the history of gold, we've whizzed by ancient Egyptian princesses, stopped off in El Dorado, and heard what Isaac Newton does to coin clippers. Next, we're crossing over the North Atlantic Ocean to hear how gold reshaped immigration, adventuring, and then even helped create the American dream.
This ain't Michigan. It's gold country. It's the golden country, untouched and uncontaminated by human hands.
When I think of the California gold rush, I think of watching old westerns like Paint Your Wagon, the film you just heard. But I have to admit, that's where my knowledge ends. So I went in search of someone who could tell me the story beyond the tough-talking cowboys.
I'm H.W. Brands, professor of history at the University of Texas at Austin. The California gold rush really redefined the American dream, the American model of success. Gold was discovered in early 1848. By the end of that year, people had begun to arrive in California from various foreign countries. The first arrivals from outside of California were from Mexico, and 1,000 Mexican miners just made their way overland to the gold fields of California. The news quickly got out to Hawaii, and people sailed the 2,000 miles to California. The news got to Australia, it got to China. The news got to Europe, to London and Paris, almost as fast as it got to New York. So they came from all over the place. By 1849, this is when it really registers in American history, and the immigrants to California from the other parts of the United States are called 49ers. But the result was that within 18 months or so of the gold discovery, there were tens of thousands of people in California, and they came all over the world. They made California in that era the most cosmopolitan place on Earth. Between 1848, the gold discovery in California, and 1875, so just a quarter of a century, as much gold was dug out of the ground as had been dug out of the ground in all of previous human history, because gold was something that everybody could agree on had reliable value, the gold standard.
The gold standard. It's a phrase that many of us have heard before. But what does it actually refer to? Here's Charles Larkin.
The gold standard, where physical gold with a value equal to all currency in circulation is kept by the country's central bank, with money representing a sort of IOU for a specific amount of gold, this being referred to as full convertibility, was up and running informally by the end of Queen Anne's reign in England, and properly established by the late 18th century in the United Kingdom. The pros of a gold standard is that in the British scenario, it was a safeguard against inflation, but does result in painful deflation. The misery the gold standard can cause was best seen in the 1920s, when the UK attempted to return to it after the wartime hiatus. The deflationary pressures on the economy were severe, which forced nominal wage cuts and a rise in unemployment as the adjustment took place. So by 1936, the UK, the US, and France had all but abandoned their attempts to restore the classical gold standard. A brief flirtation of tying the global economy through the US dollar back to gold under Bretton Woods was attempted, but this was finally abandoned in 1971, bringing a total end to the gold standard as it had existed for centuries. As the economist John Maynard Keynes had foretold, gold became a barbarous relic, ceasing to be a monetary instrument and just another commodity.
So the actual gold standard is long behind us. But listening to Charles, it did occur to me that in my family it's still central to how we think about savings. For me, gold has a feminist energy. The women in my family and the women in so many Asian families use it as a security for themselves and later their daughters. Our jewelry is a safety net of financial independence. It's something my mother-in-law has often spoken about, and so I connected with her in Nairobi over video chat.
My name is Radhika. I am Rajvi's mother-in-law come bother-in-law.
Not in the slightest. So can you tell me what your first memory of gold was?
Rajvi, ever since I was born, they started collecting gold the minute our daughter was born in the house. Unfortunately, my father couldn't afford so much, so when the sister got married, the boys' side said, we had asked for 5 tolas, so we want to wait in the wedding. And that was a real shocker for me. I was just about 12 years old. And I didn't realize this is what they're all quibbling about and, in the middle of a wedding. But those were the days when in our community they would ask for a dowry, so much